Good morning students. Today we will discuss the development of cardiovascular system. So I will take a few lectures on this. So in first lecture, first I want to make you understand. So you must be aware of this diagram which is given in your book. So you can see this is the formation of head and tail folds and the establishment of the gut. Now you can see the amniotic cavity. This is the amniotic cavity. This is the yolk sac. Slowly and slowly the bending is happening, and later on the gut formation it happens, which is surrounded by the amniotic cavity in from all the sides. So this is definitive yolk sac. This is vitalo-intestinal duct. So this is the general introduction. So as we see this section, in this you can see the neural plate and related structures. Starting from this cranial side, this is the future septum transversum. This is the future pericardial cavity. This is procaudal plate. This is neural plate, and these are the somites. So our concern is about this region only in the development of cardiovascular system. Now again the same diagram, this is the pericardial cavity and the heart tube which is developing in relation to this foregut, which is the after the formation of head and tail folds. So this is the location where the future heart and its structures they develop. Again with the folding of the head and tail folds, how the in previous diagram you can see the heart tubes, they were lying below this pericardial cavity. You can see here. So this is the pericardial cavity, this is the heart tube. But in this, once the 180-degree rotation is happening, the heart tube, they come to lie ventral to the foregut. You can see here, and it is the pericardial cavity which is lying below this heart tube. So again, a diagram, more clear diagram, which is showing once the heart tubes, they invaginate the pericardial cavity that is surrounded by the pericardial cavity. So this is the heart tube. This is septum transversum. Now starting with the development of the cardiovascular system, so if we see the internal surface of the heart and blood vessels are lined by flattened cells called endothelium. Now this endothelium is surrounded outside by muscles and the connective tissue, and all these components, they are mesodermal in origin. Now heart, basically it develops from the primitive heart tubes, and it is the first system to function in the embryo. So which is happening in the middle of the third week. So day 18 is when the cardiac precursor cells, they are seen in the form of blood islands arising from the subplanchno-pleuric mesoderm in the cardiogenic area of the embryo. So what is important regarding this is that it is the first system to function in the embryo. Now if we see what is this cardiogenic area. Now as I have shown you the diagram in previous slides, so you can appreciate here. So this is the septum transversum. This is the septum transversum. This is the cardiogenic area. This is the procaudal plate. This cranial end of the trilaminar embryonic disc between septum transversum and procaudal plate. So that area is known as the cardiogenic area. Now part of the intraembryonic coelom lying in this area forms the pericardial cavity. I have shown you the diagram, that is the relation of the heart tube along with the pericardial cavity. So initially the pericardial cavity is lying ventral to the foregut, but as the folding head and tail folds are formed, 180-degree rotation is happening, and the heart tube, they come to lie in relation that is superior to the pericardial cavity. Now this part of intraembryonic coelom is lying in this area that forms a pericardial cavity. Then subplanchno-pleuric mesoderm underneath the pericardial cavity forms the heart tube. So from where the heart tubes are basically developing, they are developing from the subplanchno-pleuric mesoderm. Now this is the area. Now you can see this is the cardiogenic area. You can see this is the future septum transversum. So this is the future pericardial cavity. So this is the procaudal plate, and this is the area from where the heart tubes they develop. Now, what is happening? What is how the story it begins? The mesenchymal cells in the cardiogenic area, that is ventral to the developing pericardial cavity, which is lying ventral to the developing pericardial cavity. So they condenses to form the angioblastic cords, which are also given the name cardiogenic cord. So whatever be the mesenchymal cells, they are lying in relation to it. In the previous diagram I have shown you. Now you can see the blood islands over here, mesenchymal cells, they are present. So they just condenses to form the angioblastic cords. Now these angioblastic cords later on they are canalized to form the tubes. So they just become the hollow structures. So they form the heart tubes. Now you can see these are the endothelial heart tubes. You can appreciate in the diagram. Initially these two heart tubes are there. Later on the fusion is starting from cranial to caudal side, and next we will discuss. So these are the endothelial heart tubes. You can see here. These are the two endothelial heart tubes. So fusion starts in craniocaudal direction. You can see. So it is starting in the craniocaudal direction, in this direction. So fusion it begins. Then caudal end it remains bifurcated. You can very well appreciate. So this portion of the heart tubes it remains separated from each other, but otherwise the fusion it happens on the cranial side. So you can see here. Now later on what is happening? So certain dilatations they appear. You can see the tortuosity is starting at this level. So that leads on to the formation of certain dilated portions in the heart tube. So you can see, so this is the single heart tube. This is the single heart tube, which is in the caudal portion. These are the bifurcated caudal ends. So this is whole. Now these are the four structure. Basically, if we have a look on that heart tube, which is fused one, the fusion it begins from cranial to caudal side. So what are the different structures which are arising from it is that from cranial to caudal side, this is bulbus cordis. Then comes the ventricle, then comes the atrium, and then comes the sinus venosus portion. So these are the basically four dilatations, and later on certain modification they happen in this heart tube, that is fused heart tube. So what are those? So dilatation from the cranial to caudal side. So I told you that basically these are the four dilatations which are visible. That is bulbus cordis, ventricle, atrium, and sinus venosus. But if we see further growth of this heart tube, from cranial to caudal side, this is the truncus arteriosus. So this dilated portion, which is the arterial end of the heart tube, so that is continuing with the aortic sac, and that aortic sac it divides into two horns. So this is the arterial end of the heart tube. Now this is the bulbus cordis portion, then comes the primitive ventricle, which is going to form the rough portion of the ventricle, and then comes the primitive atrium, which is going to form the rough portion of both the atria, and then this is the sinus venosus portion, which contribute to the smooth portion of the atrium. So that I will tell you in my next slides how it happens. You just remember at this moment is that initially those two heart tubes, which were basically separated from each other, they fused from cranial to caudal side with the bifurcated caudal end. So basically the fusion it does not happen at the caudal end, and after that certain dilatation starting from cranial to caudal side, that is bulbus cordis, primitive ventricle, primitive atrium, and sinus venosus. So these are the four basic dilatations they appear in the heart tube, and further modification it happens as the growth of the heart tube is happening. So that modification is given the name. From the arterial side there is truncus arteriosus, which is leading to the aortic sac, which is dividing into two horns, and the caudal portion is known as the venous end of the heart tube. So this information is very, very, very important. Now arterial end of the heart tube, as I told you, that truncus arteriosus is cranially continuing with the aortic sac. I told you this thing. The aortic sac has two horns, right and left. That is again clear to you. Then from each horn, which structure is arising? That is first pharyngeal arch artery. So this is the fate of the arterial end of the heart tube. So basically it is leading on to the formation of the first pharyngeal arch artery. so which lead on to the formation. Further, you can say which passes backward on lateral side of the foregut, and that continue with the dorsal aorta. So this is the fate of the arterial end of the heart tube. Now, what is the fate of the venous end of the heart tube? So it is represented by the sinus venosus. I told you. So each horn of sinus venosus it receives the three primitive veins. You can see in the diagram. So this sinus venosus is receiving the three primitive veins. So what are those? First is the vitelline vein that is coming from the yolk sac. Second is the umbilical vein which is coming from the placenta. And third is the common cardinal vein which is coming from the body wall. So this is the venous end of the heart tube. So this is the diagram which is showing the fate of the heart tube. So we will discuss the different parts in detail. So I told you the bulbous cordis portion you can see. So the distal 1/3 is forming the truncus arteriosus. Then middle 1/3 conus and proximal 1/3. So this bulbous cordis portion is divided into three parts. So the distal 1/3 is contributing to the formation of the ascending aorta and pulmonary trunk. The middle portion is contributing to the outflow tract of right and left ventricle. So you know it, that is on the right side it is leading to the pulmonary trunk and on left side it is leading to the aorta. So that outflow tracts, they are formed by the conus portion or central 1/3 portion of the bulbous cordis. Then this is the proximal portion which is going to form the rough portion of that, contributing to this ventricle portion. Now this portion, that is ventricle, is going to contribute to the trabeculated portion. So trabeculated portion of the ventricle is receiving the contribution apart from the bulbous cordis and part from the primitive ventricle. Then comes the primitive atrium is formed from the atrium. Then this body of the sinus venosus is contributing to the smooth portion of the atrium. So these are the three veins which is receiving coming from the different portion, that is common cardinal vein, umbilical vein and vitelline vein. So that will be discussed in detail in next lectures. Now if we see when the heart tube is developing, what is the position of the heart tube in relation to the pericardial cavity? Now you can see before the formation of the head fold, the heart tubes, they lie in the floor of the pericardial cavity, as I have told you. So this is the septum transversum, this is the heart tube, and this is the pericardial cavity. So initially when the basically you can say head fold is not formed, so this is the relation of the heart tube and the pericardial cavity. So heart tube is lying in the floor of the pericardial cavity. So you can see in this diagram again. So same thing. Then the position of the heart tube in after the formation of the head fold. So you can see certain changes they happen. I told you 180-degree rotation is happening. Initially it is lying in the floor of pericardial cavity. So once the rotation is happening, so what a septum transversum which was lying in this area, it is coming and lying in this portion. So what will be the location of the heart tube? So in relation to these three structures, it is lying ventral to the foregut, it is lying cranial to the septum transversum, and it is lying in the roof of the pericardial cavity. So these are the three major changes they happen when the head fold is formed and the rotation is happening at 180 degree. So it is coming and lying in the roof of the pericardial cavity. So all the structures which are present in relation to these things, so they are coming and lying in accordingly. So septum transversum is lying basically caudal to the heart tubes, or in other words you can say the heart tube is lying cranial to the septum transversum. So this is important, you can see. So these three major changes happen when the formation of the head fold is there. Now if we see the heart as a structure, so what are the layers which are present in the you can say cardiac wall? From inside to outside it is endocardium, myocardium and epicardium. So subplanchnopleuric mesoderm on the dorsal aspect of the pericardial cavity. So I told you that heart tube is lying in the roof of the pericardial cavity. So splanchnium pleuric mesoderm on the dorsal aspect of the pericardial cavity proliferate to form, and it become very thick to form the, you can say, myoepicardial mantle. You can see in the diagram. So splanchnium pleuric mesoderm, which is lying in this region, that proliferate and become myoepicardial mantle. At this stage, it is separated from the heart tube by a jelly-like substance. You can see here. So gelatinous substance is there which is separating the myoepicardial mantle from the endothelial heart tubes. So what is this cardiac jelly? Basically, it is acellular matrix secreted by developing myocardium. So this is how it happens. So this diagram is before the formation of the head fold, you can see. So once the, you can say, invagination of the heart tube is happening towards the pericardial cavity, it all around, it is just surrounded by the, you can say, pericardial cavity. Now this is the basically self-drawn diagram. So heart tube is there, you can see. This is cardiac jelly, this is splanchnium pleuric mesoderm, this is pericardial cavity, and this is somatopleuric mesoderm. So pericardial cavity divides the mesoderm into two parts. So that is splanchnium pleuric and somatopleuric. So endothelial heart tubes, they forms the endocardium of the heart. Myoepicardial mantle, it forms the myocardium and visceral layer of the pericardium, and somatopleuric mesoderm, it forms the parietal layer of the pericardium. So crux of the story is, so what are the different structures which are just developing from these three important components? What are those? That is endothelial heart tube, myoepicardial mantle, and somatopleuric mesoderm. So what are the structure formed by these things are endocardium of the heart tube, then myocardium and visceral layer of pericardium, and parietal layer of pericardium respectively. So this is up to this we have discussed the fate of the heart tube, how the heart tubes they fused and the dilatations they happen, and what are the different dilatations they are going to form. So this is basically the introduction part of the CVS. So in next lecture we will continue with the different parts of the heart, how they are developing. So I hope you will like my channel. So I kindly request you to subscribe it, like it, and share it. Thank you very much.